and a very warm welcome to episode 4 of my Christmas room box series. Now my main aim for today's episode is to get the wallpaper in place, and I'm going to be having half papered and half panelled walls. But before I make a start on that, there are one or two other little jobs that I want to do. So let's get started. Okay, so before I start decorating the inside of the room box, I want to tidy up these outer edges. So here where I've painted the ceiling, I've been a little bit messy, so I'm going to touch that up again using the natural calico ceiling paint. But on these other front edges, I'm going to be using a terracotta paint, and that will be to match the brick that I'm going to be using around the outside of the room box. So this is a sample of my brick paper here, and I'm going to be putting that on the sides and the back of the room box. So what I've done is mix some acrylic paints here just to match that brick paper. Now you don't have to do your sort of front pieces the same colour as your brick or whatever you're going to paint your sort of external parts of your box, but you do want to apply some sort of finish to them just to sort of neaten that off. Okay, so I'm going to take the room box apart now and get painting. Okay, so I've got here my sides and my base, and I've put the top and the back panel safely out of the way. And then what I've done is just go through with my paint and put a little dot on the pieces that I need to paint. And that will apply to the back of the room box as well. So if you imagine, the sides will be covered in paper once the box is all glued together, but these bits that sit behind the back panel will be difficult to paper, so you want to put a bit of paint on those as well. So as I mentioned in one of the earlier episodes, try not to get the paint into the grooves, otherwise you'll have trouble getting your back panel back in. But if you do, then you can just sand that out once the paint has completely dried. Okay, so that's those pieces all done, and I've got them all propped up on tins of paint. And whilst they're drying, I just want to show you the wallpaper that I'm going to be using. So I've got this lovely scrapbook paper pad full of Christmas designs, and the size of this is 12 by 12. The good thing is that there are 2 pages of each design, and they're printed on the front and back. Now some of them are probably a little bit too large for doll's house wallpaper. I really like that one. That's really nice as well. And the one on the opposite page as well. But the one I've actually chosen, I just flick through to it, is, that's nice as well, is this one. And I thought that had a really nice wallpapery look to it. So as I say, I'm going to be using that around the top of the room, and then I'll have panelling at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is actually cut my 2 sheets in half, so I'll then have 4 pieces. So that will do the back wall and then the side walls, and then the final piece I'll use around the top of the chimney breast. Now I'm going to link to some of these in the description box below through my Amazon affiliates account. I couldn't find this exact one again, but I'll link to some of my favourites down there. But you do want to be looking for a pad that has 2 sheets of the design in. Otherwise you could be a little bit inventive and just have different colours on each wall. You could just paper one wall and perhaps paint the others and things like that. So if you can only get hold of, you know, pads with 1 sheet of each design, then don't worry, because you can, like I say, be a little bit creative with your decorating. Okay, so I've torn out the 2 sheets that I want to use. I'll just pop that one to one side. And then on the back here, I've measured up by 6 inches or 152 millimetres. And just make sure that you're measuring the right way. So I want that sort of going from top to bottom there. So I want to cut down like that. I've made my pencil marks on the back, and I'm just going to use my craft knife to cut. But just remember, if you use your craft knife, you'll need to change the blade before you go back to cutting wood. 2 pieces there, and my 4 pieces there. Okay, so I now want to put the room box back together again with my masking tape. So all of my edging paint is now dry, and what I want to do next is glue the flooring panel into place. So the reason I put the box back together to do that is just so that we get it in exactly the right place, because if you remember, the sides actually overlap the floor, and if you glue the wooden panel over either way too far, then you won't be able to get the sides back down. So always put your box back together just roughly before you glue that into place. And then what I also want to say is when we come to put the wallpaper in place, obviously it will sit right at the top of the sides because the roof just sort of sits, or the ceiling, sorry, just sort of sits on top of those. But when we come to do the back panel, and we're going to be doing it all separate just to make it easier, there's about a 3mm drop that we need to allow for, so that the paper starts at the same level as our side panels. So what you want to do is just make a little pencil mark up there without drawing onto your ceiling if you can help it. So just sort of come along there like that, and you only need to do a couple of little marks and then we can join those up. So like that. And then what I'm also going to do whilst I'm working on other areas of the room box is just pop the door out, just so I don't damage it in any way. Okay, so that's the door safely out of the way. And then what I forgot to say is that you also need to do little pencil lines down the side of your back panel, because obviously that tucks in to the groove there as well. So just one down there, actually here you can go all the way down. That side as well. And then we know not to paper past those lines. The one on the ceiling, we don't want to go all the way along because we don't want to make a mark on our ceiling paper, but we will copy that along with our rule once we get the back panel out. Okay, so I'm now going to stick the flooring into place, and I'm actually going to apply the glue to the back of my flooring sheet. Okay, so get that into place like that, and then push your sides in to where they will actually sit. And even though I've got masking tape on there, the sides are trying to push out a little bit, which they will do until we actually glue it down. So push them in and make sure that the wooden flooring is sitting in the right place. And then you can give it a press down. Make sure you press right along the edges, and then what we're going to do in a moment is actually dismantle the box again so we can weigh this floor part down and leave that to dry. Okay, so I've dismantled the box, and I'm just going to put some pieces of kitchen towel on top of the flooring, and then I'm going to weigh that down with some heavy books. And that can now be left to dry. Okay, so I just want to start then by carrying along that line I did along the top. So joining up those 2 little pencil marks I made. And then I know that my paper needs to be positioned below the line. Okay, so before you attach your wallpaper, just have a think about how it's going to run on to your side panels. So with this one, we've obviously got a sort of striped design. So what I want to do is line it up so that I start in between 2 rows of baubles. And that's going to look nicer lining up, if you think about it, next to another row of baubles rather than splitting a bauble. And it will be easier to line up that way as well. So then over here, I'll sort of find the repeat on this piece, if I bring that piece in like that. So the repeat is there if I line it up like that. Actually, let's go up to the top like that. So then what I'll do is I'll cut down in between this row of baubles, and then that's where my pattern will start on my side panel. So rather than having a split bauble, like I say, it will just be the gap between the baubles. Now I know you may not have baubles, but just have a think about how you're going to join that on. But I am going to glue this back piece into place, and then once the glue has dried, I can trim along this edge and trim out the door opening. So I'll start with this piece, and then I can do my sort of lining up and trimming on these side pieces. Okay, so it's the next day now and my glue has completely dried. I'm going to use my rule just to go along the line there. Like that, and then I'm going to turn that over and cut out in the door opening. And don't pull away until you know that that is completely cut through, otherwise you might tear the paper on the correct size of the piece. So that's the panel done, and I now want to line up the wallpaper, and then I can cover the sides. Okay, so I've cut the wallpaper for the side pieces as well. And despite what I said earlier about cutting between the sort of rows of baubles, I have actually got to split a bauble that end. So it lines up at the first side, but not this side. But that's actually okay. That might look quite nice, a bauble going around the corner like that. So I'm now going to glue these into place. Okay, so that's the side panels papered as well. And what I want to do now is glue the door into place. So you can either apply the glue around the edges of your door or around the edges of your opening. I'm going to apply mine around the edges of the opening. So it's a really good idea to dry fit the door before applying your glue, which I've already done. And then I did have to do a little bit more trimming where the wallpaper was overhanging. And I trimmed from this side, which just made it a little bit easier to see where I was going. And it doesn't matter if you do a little bit of damage around the outside edge of the door, because we're going to be putting a surround in place, but do try to be careful. But I just sort of ripped a little bit of the paper in that top corner there. But as I say, I'll cover that up with the door surround. Okay, so press the frame back into place. And mine is still actually a little bit tight, but I didn't want to take too much off around the door opening. But because of that, what's happening is my thinner sort of frame in the centre where my pane divides is pushing up a little bit. Can you see? So I'm just being really careful with it. But when we actually put the acetate on the back of the panel, we'll glue that down against the acetate so you won't see that lifting if you're experiencing that same thing. And I think as well, perhaps putting the glue onto this type of wood did actually make the wood swell a little bit, and that may have made the opening a little bit tighter as well. So just always dry fit before you put the door back in. Trim little amounts off at a time and then fit your door back into place. So what I actually want to do now is cut the pieces for the surround, apply some paint, and we'll get that glued into place as well. Okay, so for my door surround, I'm going to be using this moulding, and this is actually a picture rail or dado rail. You can see from the end there, that's got a really nice pattern to it, or shape. So what I'm going to do is have the sort of larger part of the pattern on the outside of the door. So this piece here will run around the inside edge of the frame, and I'm actually going to overlap by the width of that first flat edge there. So that's about 1.5 millimeters. So to measure for that, you want to lay that alongside your door. And remember, we'll only be going down to the bottom of the door and not actually down to the bottom of the back panel, because that bit slots into our flooring. And then you want to make your pencil mark just below the top of the door to the thickness of your overlap. So in my case that's 1.5 millimeters, so the thickness of that straight edge there. So I'm going to come down like that. And then whenever I'm doing mitre cuts, I like to just make a mark on the wood of where or which direction the cut needs to go in. So it needs to go across like that. And then our top piece will obviously join along there with the widest point at the top, and then the mitre will come down like that. But just get your first piece cut. And for that I'm going to be using my mitre guillotine, and I've set the cut line there to 45 degrees. So you just sort of squeeze that like a clothes peg and you can move it around the dial there. And the first one there is your 45 degrees, and that's the angle cut that you need to make. So line up your piece in your cutter so that the little pencil line you made is in line with the line there beneath the blade. And that's where your mitre needs to start. So get it lined up so that you're actually cutting from your pencil mark and then across like that. Now normally if you were using a straight piece of wood you could then use that piece to join on, just landed in the glue, but obviously because we want that pattern on the inside edge you'll need to make the cut the other way around. So put your first piece in place there. Okay, so you now need to cut the mitre so that it's going in the opposite direction to the one we've just cut. So to do that it's easier just to pop it upside down in your cutter like that. So just hold on to it nice and tightly, keeping it straight as you can on the plate there, and then make your cut. And if we go and have a look at that, that will line up with our first piece. I'll pick you up in a moment, like that. And then we've got that little overlap that we wanted along the top edge of the door there. So now we need to do the same thing again and make our pencil mark at this edge of the door, again by that amount that we want to overlap by. So in my case again 1.5. So I'm going to come in from the edge of the door. Oops, helps if I'm on camera. So there's my edge, so I want to come in by the 1.5 or the thickness of this flat edge, like that. And again, just so I don't get muddled when I get to the cutter, I'm going to draw my line going across like that. So again, get that lined up in the cutter along that little pencil mark that you've made, and then make your cut. So that piece will go there, and then we just need one more piece. Again, you need to make the cut in the opposite direction, so turn it upside down in your cutter. Make your cut as high up as you can so you're not wasting too much. That will then join up there, and then you want to lay it into place so that the top edge is straight. So you can do that by eye or actually use your rule to make sure you've got a straight line along there with the top of the door. And then make your pencil mark at this bottom edge. Again in line with the door, not the bottom of the panel. Bring in your mitre cutter, set it to a 0 degree angle so that we can cut straight. And again, put that piece in and cut along the line. And if you're interested, these handheld mitre cutters are available in my Etsy shop, and at the moment there's 10% off in my Black Friday sale, which runs from Thursday the 28th of November until midnight on Saturday the 30th of November. So once you've cut your door surround pieces, give them a gentle sand. Use a soft brush to remove your sanding dust. And your pieces are now ready for paint. Again, I'm using my natural calico emulsion paint, and I'll be applying 2 coats and giving them a gentle sand after each coat of paint has dried. Make sure you paint along the edges of the pieces as well, which will be visible when they're in place. Okay, so my door surround pieces are now dry, so I'm going to glue those into place. So apply your glue and then glue that into place, making sure that you're lining it up along the bottom of the door and not overhanging, you know, the bit that is going to be going into the groove at the bottom on the base piece. And then line it up if you have a little mark on your moulded piece, so that that's straight all the way along. Give it a press into place. I'm just going to stand up and put a bit of weight behind it. Use a cocktail stick to remove any excess glue, if there is any. And move on to your top piece. And this time you want to put a bit on each of the mitre cuts as well. Okay, put that into place along there. Just sort of press it gently into place, and you can then get your 3rd piece into place and then straighten that top piece up so that you get it in exactly the right position. And put that piece into place as well. Again, getting it lined up at the bottom so you're not overlapping the pencil line at the bottom there. And then you can bring your top piece down to meet it, so you've got those lovely joins at each side. I'm just going to press mine in a little bit as well. There's a little bit of gap in there, and then you can give it all a press. And don't worry if you have got any gap in your mitres at the top. I've got a little bit there, but what we can do is just feed a little bit of wood filler in and then paint over that. And we may need to do that when we do the panelling as well, so we can do that all as one job. Okay, so there's the room box back together, and I think that looks really good, and it's beginning to look quite Christmassy, isn't it? And I won't subject you to my singing, but I did just sing to Matt, it's beginning to look a lot like a Christmas room box, and he told me off for being so cheesy. So I'm not going to subject you to that. Now, in the next episode, we're going to be building the chimney breast, and then the episode following that, we'll get the panelling in, or the skirting, the panelling, and the coving. And then the fun really does begin when we start doing all of the little Christmas displays, presents, the Christmas tree, and all of those other wonderful bits and pieces. So that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye.